Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. We've got a special guest today. We're going to discuss something a little bit different, but very important. We've got Juli Berwald here. Juli is an author and the president of Tela Coral. Juli, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jason. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here. We chatted, I guess it was probably a few weeks ago or so, and I was just really intrigued by some of the things you're doing. So I appreciate you coming back to record the conversation for everybody else that needs to hear the story, I guess. Juli, we're going to discuss kind of how you got from where you were to where you are now. But before we do that, let's give our listeners kind of the 30-second elevator pitch. Tela Coral. What is Tela Coral? Just so people can kind of have an idea what that is before we continue with the conversation.
Tela is this place in Honduras. It's on the north coast, which faces the Caribbean, and it's a really big bay. And it's sort of in this place where the Banana Republic started. So it's like been polluted. It's been industrialized for longer than anywhere else in the Caribbean. And it's just this crazy place where the coral are healthy. And I don't know if a lot of people have been diving a lot, but coral reefs in the Caribbean are really struggling right now. And this place has a dozen endangered species, including elkhorn corals, which are just thriving. And it's a big, huge mystery, and it's a big, huge place of hope. And so it's one of the places I've been working a lot lately.
Very, very cool. So that kind of sets the frame, I guess, for how we're going to end up in the conversation. But now that we've got that we've answered any of those initial questions people might have when I introduced you. Let's figure out how you got there. So let's go back. I don't know how far we need to go, but usually people that I have on the show here have an interesting route for however they got where they are. So how far back do you think we should go?
Yeah, it's a long and windy trail. I guess that's probably pretty typical for people who adventure into the world. I guess I can just start with I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, farthest from any ocean that you could get. But I will say, my dad was this really interesting guy. Well, is still a really interesting person, but he's a physician, but he was drafted during Vietnam, and there was this lapidary workshop on the base. And he got really into rocks.
Lapidary. Help me out here. If lapidary I don't know what it is, I'm guessing. So what is lapidary?
Yeah. Cutting and polishing rocks.
Okay.
So,
cool.
Yeah. So my dad got really into that. And then basically every family vacation was dragging us around the United States, knocking on someone's door and being like, can we dig up rocks in your backyard? And the farmer, the rancher would be like, sure, $5 a bucket, and then we would be child labor digging up rocks, which we would then haul back to St. Louis, and my dad would spend the rest of the year cutting and polishing.
I'm curious about that because I grew up in the West and have spent a lot of time in the Southwest, and that's a thing, right? You drive down the highway and you see the big rock shops. And
that's right.
Imagine you guys stopped at every rock shop.
Every rock shop,
between
yeah.
Los Angeles and St. Louis, I'm sure.
Well, talking about travel, we went to every state and every province. So we were, it was quite something. By the time I was 18, I'd been to all 50 states. So that was really, yeah.
So was this a summer thing, or were you homeschooled on the road, or how did,
No.
I'm envisioning summers.
No, my dad, summers, we would take off for 3 weeks in the Suburban and drive around. And my dad would spend the whole year mapping out these trips. And we'd go to every national park and, along the way, it wasn't just digging rocks, but we did a lot of rock digging.
This resonates with me because I spent my summers with my dad traveling around the country. And I'd been to all 50 states. I was 20 before I got to all 50 states.
Yeah. And I probably am lying because I didn't get to Alaska till I was in grad school. So yeah, that's true.
All right. So we have a lot of similarity there. And I remember sleeping a lot in the truck or in the back of the truck in rest areas on the side of the road. Every weekend we'd be in a town. We were doing the hot air balloon thing. So we would travel around the country and fly balloons, and we'd go to festivals, a new festival every weekend. So usually on the weekends we had a place to stay because the festival would sponsor it and, give us a room. But other than that, we were pretty much sleeping in the truck. Were you sleeping in the Suburban with your dad?
No, my mom wouldn't do that.
Okay. Lucky you.
But it was a lot of motels, motels and little towns. Anyway.
Did you have siblings doing this with you?
Yeah. I mean, to get into it, my dad had built this, it was a Suburban. So my dad had built like a box behind the back seat. Mm-hmm. And that's where we put all the rock hounding tools and stuff, like the sledgehammers and all of that stuff. And my little sister had to sleep on top of the box. Mm-hmm. Like we put a sleeping bag there and literally no seatbelts or anything. And had my dad ever stopped short, right through the front window. My brother, who was sort of the king of the kids, got the back seat. And then I was on top of the suitcases in the way back. So it was, it was definitely, but it was family time, and there are a lot of really good memories from that time.
You speak pretty fondly of it. I'm curious, your siblings and especially your mom, was she all on board with that? Or maybe your dad's going to listen to this.
Okay. He knows. I speak fondly of it, but also I was I really didn't want any part of the rock hounding. I was just a really voracious reader. And so I would go to the library and I would get an extended checkout of 40 books, and I would bring 40 books with me and just read while everybody else was digging, because I refused to dig at some point. But but I will say you're right, and I do speak fondly of it because I think what it did was it really gave me a sense of nature and the immensity of our continent, and how just the sense of awe about the world that you don't get unless you're just seeing it in person, touching the ground, walking through the forests or whatever, stumbling, falling, all of the things that happen when you go outside. So
I think you're absolutely right. And it's people that haven't experienced that. It's just that concept of traveling around and seeing that many places and having those experiences just not part of their normal life. And when you grow up with that, it just becomes kind of normal. I don't know. Do you remember going back to school at the end of the summer and people, oh, what'd you do on your summer vacation?
Yes.
Right. And did you think you were weird because everybody else was well, we went to Disney.
Exactly.
I remember that.
We went to Hilton Head. Yeah, exactly. And I'd be we were somewhere in Wyoming.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. Yeah. But, on the other hand, I recognize now it was an enormous gift. And also to meet all kinds of people, not just people who were Disney or Hilton Head or whatever, but you would meet the most interesting people out there. And that was also a gift, was to get outside of the bubble where I grew up in a suburban, neighborhood of St. Louis, and just to kind of meet people from Maine and meet people from New Mexico, and how different they're not just the geography where they lived, but the way they spoke and the things that mattered. It was a great gift. So
yeah. Do you feel so when you were back at school, I'm just curious because that is a different way. In my experience, it was a different way of growing up. And people that didn't have that experience, sometimes I honestly had a hard time relating with them sometimes. In school, did you have issues with that or challenges, or were you just able to kind of be a chameleon get in? Or
yeah, I think I became more chameleon-like. I think that's kind of natural to my personality also. And I think that something about it fed my optimism, because I felt there's all this coolness in the world. How could you not, if something's bad in your life, there's alternatives everywhere. Like it kind of gave me a sense of like, there's ways to fix your problems because of this massive diversity of ways of living on our planet. That's a little Pollyanna, I recognize, but I think it definitely informed my view of the world.
No, I liked it. It's just, well, the name of the podcast is Big World Made Small. It is a big world, right?
Right.
And there's so many different ways to connect and things to go and see. And it just kind of opens up your mind, I think.
Right.
Growing up like that and having those experiences opposed to, and I'm not knocking it. A lot of people live in the same town that they grew up in and they haven't maybe even left their state and they're perfectly happy and that's fine. But when you do have those experiences, it opens things. That's why we're having a conversation today about a place in Honduras, right?
Which I haven't even gotten close to. I haven't even gotten close to.
I know. I asked you how we got from where you were to where you were to where you are. And we've spent 10 minutes just chatting about rock hounding in the U.S.
I know.
Cool. I love that. That's cool. All right.
So anyway.
What was the next step?
Basically, amid all this wandering as a kid, I really had never seen the ocean. I mean, I'd seen the ocean. We'd walked up to the ocean. We'd traveled from coast to coast, but I never stuck my head in the water. And in college, I got the opportunity to go on a study abroad program. I went to Tel Aviv University and I was pretty miserable there. It was I just wasn't fitting in. I wasn't fitting in with the people. I struggled with the classes. I didn't like that much. I mean, I just was not happy. And I could see myself eating too much, like basically falafel off the side of the street and not like, and so I guess maybe there was this sense of like, I need to do something about this. And I saw a sign on the side of a building and it was like marine ecology course 1 week over, October break. And I was like, sign me up, like I need to do something. So I got into the class and we got on this bus. We drove through the desert. We get out in a lot, which is on the Red Sea. And I was like, where am I? Like I had never seen anything like this place. The mountains are bright red. The ocean is bright blue. It's just that you feel like you're suddenly on Mars or something. Like it's this very strange physical place. Mm-hmm. It's like nowhere else. And then the teachers in the class, they're like really abrupt and they're like, here's a mask, here's a snorkel, here's some fins, go, 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 get in the water, go. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. So they're just like, go, go. Like there was no excuses. So I just did it. And I put my face in the water and in the Red Sea in general, the corals are very close to shore. You kick maybe like 100 feet, maybe 100 yards. And suddenly you're face to face with this like incredible reality, which is this architecture, this jungle, all these fish and colors and textures and forms. And I was like, what is this? Mm-hmm. And then you have a recognition that even though you're looking at a jungle, it's all animals. These aren't plants. And they're animals with nervous systems and digestive systems, and they reproduce like we do, and they're like us, but they're like living this life that's so different from ours. And I don't know, my brain was blown. And so I got out of the water and I was like, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced. We had an amazing professor in the class and he's like, okay, you're going to memorize 20 species. Tomorrow we're having a test on it. You're doing experiments after that. And it created this excitement in me that I didn't expect. And I was a math undergrad. And so one of the things we learned was how to predict like population sizes of these different corals using these equations. And I was like, wait, what? You can use math for real life? And so I just like got out of the water. I'm like, I'm going to be a marine biologist.
Wow.
It was crazy. And so I got back to my actual college in Massachusetts. And I was like, I want to be a marine biologist. And my college was like, we don't have that major. And so I ended up staying a math major, but I did do like a independent study on coral my senior year. And then I was like, I'm going to apply to grad school to study coral because they're these incredible animals.
So I have to ask,
and okay,
this is a profound thing, obviously. And
yeah,
for those folks just listening to it that don't see the look on your face, they probably hear it in your voice, but this was a moment. This was a moment.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you first went to the university and you're like, I'm going to major in math, what was your thinking and your plan? What were you going to do
with
with that?
math. Oh, I don't know if I had a plan, but what happened was when I got to my college, I was completely out. Um, I was I my educate I had a public school education, and I had gotten into a really selective college, and I was outclassed by everybody there. Like I didn't compete. I wasn't prepared to
Okay.
compete, except for in math. In math, I had had an incredible math teacher in high school. And so I was like the only thing I was ahead of the game in. So
I got
my
it.
first essays I turned in, I got terrible grades. I didn't know how to write an essay properly. And so anyway, I just chose math basically because it was the only thing I could do. So there was no plan except
Okay.
for survival. So
No, I get that. I mean that's not an uncommon thing to do. And I guess
yeah,
if you're going to be pushed, I shouldn't say pushed, but if you're going to end up in one particular area, math is a good one,
it was fine. Yeah.
right? Because
And I liked it.
yeah,
I had sort of a sense that, and I still do to this day, like math is this sort of beautiful structure, especially like these higher level of maths when you're not dealing with numbers anymore and you're just dealing with ideals of infinity and zero and
hmm
how do these things map onto each other? How are they connected with each other? There's this sort of like, oh, you're touching something that's like perfect. And that appeals to, I think, a young mind that is like doesn't want to deal with the sort of BS of the world. I think there's this
interesting.
sense of that.
Do you think there's a difference? I don't know why I'm asking this, but what I hear is very kind of high level, kind of just conceptual type of stuff, as opposed to
Yeah.
maybe when somebody hears math major, they think accountant. And I'm not knocking
No.
accounting, but it's like what you
Right.
just
Right.
described
Right.
is the exact opposite of
Right.
accounting, but it's still math.
Exactly.
No, it's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. 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 So like this stuff was like kind of right. I'm terrible with numbers and arithmetic. Actually, my whole family makes fun of me because I can never calculate tips. But like, but
But
like
math major, I'm sure
yeah,
I can hear those
exactly.
jokes. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. You could be right with us at a dinner table. But yeah, no, this stuff is more it was called topology. It's more about ideals than it
Okay.
is about numbers. So,
All right.
but if you follow math through calculus, you get to this stuff.
So you got to get through the basics before you get to that, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Calculus is sort of the edge of it. And then once you go through calculus, you get to this other weird stuff like group springs and fields. And
All right.
it's cool, but
I'm
it's
curious. I'm just curious. Do you have kind of an inkling for, or I guess an aptitude or interest in music as well?
no, I wish
No,
I did.
I know
Yeah,
there's sometimes we talk about the connection between math and music. And I
yeah,
was just curious if sometimes
yeah.
people but maybe that's more on the, I don't know.
No, I think
Anyway,
you're right. There
just
is a
curious.
connection. Like if you read like biographies of kind of mathematicians and physicists who are
Mhm.
sort of also dabbling in these more ideally sort of places, yeah, they all are musicians, but I'm
Okay.
not
I'm just
talented
curious.
that way.
No, you've got other things going on. I get that. All right.
Yeah. So
So,
anyway, so coral.
so,
So then I came back. I'm like, I want to work on coral. Couldn't work on coral because I was completely unqualified to get into grad school as a biologist.
mhm.
But I finally got into grad school working on satellite imagery of the ocean because of my math. And it was early days of climate change. It was in the 90s. So we knew climate change was a thing. The question was, how much was the ocean contributing or mitigating climate change? Because like what climate change is caused by is, burning fossil fuels and producing carbon dioxide. What photosynthesis does is use carbon dioxide, mixing it with water and making sugar.
Mhm.
And so you're taking up the carbon dioxide. So the question was how much photosynthesis is going on in the ocean. And it was around the time we had the first satellites up that could look at, if you look at in a simple way to think of it, if you look at how green the ocean is, you can say, oh, that relates to how much phytoplankton there is
Mhm.
and how much photosynthesis is going on. So we started trying to come up with numbers um, to to calculate how much the ocean was helping us out. And it turns out about 30% of the fossil fuels we put into the atmosphere every year get taken up by the oceans. So it's a really significant mitigator of climate change. And so that was what my dissertation was on. It wasn't political at the time. No one was questioning, like, this was just like numbers, like how much carbon dioxide is going up, how much is going back into the ocean. And so that's what I worked on.
Right.
And then and then basically I met my husband at the end of grad school, and he got a job in Austin, Texas. And I had a postdoc in Santa Cruz, California, but it was one of those, like, he was going to make more money than me. So we moved to Austin.
I'm curious.
And
what
sometimes
you
practice. He was in business.
And okay, so kind of, okay, yeah, I got that.
Yeah.
All right,
So we're really different. And we moved to Texas, and basically I fell out of the academic world at that point. There wasn't anyone doing satellite imagery of the ocean. The satellite imagery in Texas was about like land subsidence because of oil drilling. And I just wasn't interested in it. So I actually fell out of academics and got a job at a textbook company. Mm-hmm. And I started writing, doing something that I had been terrified of in college.
Wow.
But somehow I found that I loved it. And so I started writing like physics books and calculus books and biology books. And very slowly I started writing magazine articles. The more I wrote like mainstream stuff, the more I liked that. And I got a little gig along the way writing for National Geographic.
Okay.
And just like the front of the magazine, there's like these little teeny articles that are like 200 words long. And I started writing those, and that was like so much fun. And I started calling up the researchers who were usually behind whatever the little article was about, and getting back into the world of research science. And I loved it. I loved talking to them. I loved crafting these articles and making them fun to read. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking like, what do I want to leave on this planet, like when I'm gone? And I was like, I kind of mentioned how I'd been a voracious reader, and I still am. And I was like, what if I could try to write a whole book? Mm-hmm. And so that idea kind of popped in my head, and I was like in my 40s. And I was asked to fact check an article about ocean acidification, which was being written by Elizabeth Colbert, who's a New Yorker writer. One of the things that carbon dioxide also does, besides warm up our planet, is when it mixes with water, it makes the water acidic. And that makes it hard for things with shells to grow their shells. Because we've heard, like, if you drink Coca-Cola, it's acidic, it'll etch your teeth. Coffee, acidic, it'll etch your teeth. Like, same thing. Like, acids tend to etch at calcium carbonate.
So is that what we refer to as bleaching of the corals? Is that basically what that is, or is that different?
That's different. Okay. I'll get there. Yeah, I'll get there. But yeah, no, this is for all things that make shells. And so many things in the ocean make shells, clams and crabs and oysters and, a lot of things in the ocean have shells. So the question was like, what was this ocean acidification going to do to these animals in the ocean, which are so shelly? Mm-hmm. So in that article, which I was asked to just fact check, I wasn't writing it, there was like a winners and losers graphic, and it said, which animals are going to be winners in a more acidic ocean and which are going to be losers. And on the winner side, there were jellyfish. And I was like, okay, sure, jellyfish don't have shells, but certainly like the acidity must mess with them somehow. Like, how much research has been done on that? So I went to look into the scientific research, and there was like nothing done. But there was this huge debate about whether jellyfish were taking over our oceans or not. And among the scientists, like, they were fighting with each other. Like, you don't have any right to say this. You don't have any right to say this. Like, it was very out of place for scientific articles. And I'm like, what is going on? So I Googled it, and it was like, there was all these people saying jellyfish were taking over our oceans in like the mainstream press. And I was like, wait, what is going on here? So then I was like, maybe this is what my book is about. And I took a note from my dad, and I started like making all of our family vacations around jellyfish.
I bet your kids love that.
Yeah. So there would be like jellyfish scientists I'd want to talk to, and I'd be like, okay, guys, we're going to Alabama, So I just started very slowly to sort of accumulate knowledge about jellyfish and what was happening to them and who was studying them. And like we ended up going to Massachusetts to Cape Cod because they were making some jellyfish robots there. And we ended up going to Denver because one of the best jellyfish paleontologists was there. So like I just created this like jellyfish journey for my family.
Julie, I don't think I can let the conversation go without asking you about jellyfish robots. Like I would not be a very good podcast host if I didn't ask, what is a jellyfish robot?
So it turns out, I hope I'm not getting too sciencey here because I know this is a travel, but no, okay.
To me, adventure travel is about opening your mind, expanding your mind, learning new things. And I'm just here to have a conversation with you. Hopefully everybody's
okay. Yeah. So the jellyfish robot story is really cool because it turns out jellyfish are the most efficient swimmers in the ocean. And they learned this by looking at jellyfish robots. So people like the Navy was interested in jellyfish robots as like spy tools or for monitoring. And so there was a group funded to kind of try to make a jellyfish robot at Woods Hole, or actually it was at the Marine Biology Lab in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And so I showed up to talk to these guys. Basically, the story is this. They created a robot out of silicone, kind of, and it's like an umbrella-shaped thing with actuators underneath. Their actuators are the robot word for muscles. Mm-hmm. And basically, the reason jellyfish are so efficient because they squeeze closed and that creates a jet which pushes water out behind the jellyfish. And then the blubber part, the watery part of the jellyfish opens it up for free. So you don't have to use a muscle to open it back up. So you only have to use half the energy basically to make a motion because the watery part of the bell, the water does the work for you for free. It's like squeezing a water balloon. It pops back open on its own. Okay. So that's it. So basically they tell me the story, which is, I think, really fun. So the first time they put the robot in the water, they put it in, they squeeze the actuator, closed. The jellyfish jets forward like they expected. And then the release the actuators, it opens back up and the jellyfish goes back to where it had been before. And it was like a yo-yo just going back and forth between these two places. And they're like, oh man, our robot's not working. And then there was like the student who was like, well, we didn't actually have time to finish building the robot. And you know how a jellyfish has that sort of elegant little peplum on the bottom? It has that thing that kind of flips out and then floats down and flips out and floats down. You've kind of seen that on a jellyfish. Mm-hmm. So they were like, well, we made something like that, but we never glued it on to the robot. So the student was like, important. Yeah. So they pull it out, they glue that on, and it turns out that's everything. So when they turned on the robot again, it went boop, 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 boop. It just across this little swimming pool they had it in. And it turns out that little flip creates little turbulent eddies that swing around the top of the bell of the jellyfish and actually create a low pressure that pulls the jellyfish through the water. So right. the wiggle is everything. And if you think about it, what the people who study this stuff learned was that like in water, everything wiggles. If you think about it, a fish wiggles, everything wiggles. There's no moving without wiggling in the water. And that creates huge efficiencies in terms of movement. But because we come from a land-based thinking, every boat, every submarine, everything we've ever built underwater, except for fins, when you go scuba diving, they're
rigid.
They don't wiggle. They're rigid.
Exactly. Yep.
So we haven't taken advantage of the wiggle underwater.
So we need to get rid of our rigid thinking to better understand the ocean. That's what I heard.
Yes, exactly. And I couldn't have said it any better. And the jellyfish were really instructive. Well, they taught the scientists about all of that. That's very cool. I'm happy I asked that. Story. That's something I've never heard of before, and I think we can take this conversation and break it up into little clips that are going to go viral on TikTok, and teach the whole world about the how jellyfish move. So the problem of rigid thinking. Yeah, problems with rigid thinking, and I love that.
All right, cool.
Yes. So anyway, eventually, I had enough jellyfish stories to propose a book about jellyfish. And along the way, what happened was I realized that I wasn't just learning about jellyfish, I was learning about myself, because that always happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also realized that I didn't want to write a book that was just 10 chapters of jellyfish science, because who wants to read that? And so I ended up pitching a book that was science mixed with memoir. It was stories about what I learned from the jellyfish, but also like kind of how I learned to share my voice and how I learned that my voice mattered. And the book ended up being called Spineless, and it's the science of jellyfish and the art of growing a backbone.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's a mixture of science and memoir. And I'm not going to lie, I had a hard time getting getting an agent who would take me on. But once I did, and we got it out to the publishers, it turned out great. And I have the best publisher, I think. And I had a great editor, and the book really did well. And it found an audience, and it was very exciting. So the publisher had an option on my second book, and I was finally like, I think I'm ready to go back to the coral. Which I had fallen in love with, And it turns out coral and jellyfish are first cousins. They're both part of the same phylum, Cnidaria. And if you take a jellyfish and you turn it upside down, you get what's called a polyp, which is kind of like a sea anemone. But if you put a bunch of them together and then build a skeleton around them, you get a coral. So corals are these colonial animals. And what makes them so magical is that they're like basically a jellyfish, but they've added a magical touch, which is that they have a symbiont that lives inside of them, which is a phytoplankton. So it's what I studied in grad school, which does photosynthesis. And that corals live in the tropical parts of the ocean because they have to supply those symbionts with as much light as possible for as much time as possible. And so in the tropics, you have the most sunlight. And they also live close to shore because they have to be near the surface, have enough light for these symbionts. And what they do, those little algae, they live basically in the digestive system, in the skin of the coral, and they photosynthesize, and they make a ton of sugar, and they feed 90% of that sugar to the coral animal. So the coral animal gets most of its energy from these algae just pumping away inside of their bodies.
So the coral, 90% of the energy from the phytoplankton or the whatever goes to the coral. I got to ask, where does the other 10% go?
To the algae itself.
Oh, yeah.
It has to keep its systems a go.
Okay, that makes sense.
It has to keep photosynthesizing.
Right, that makes sense.
But so like coral are solar powered animals largely. And that's so much energy that they are able to build stone. So they harvest calcium and carbon from the water, and they merge them together, and they make the coral reefs.
Right.
And those reefs are, these magical places that I first saw when I first put my head in the water. And they're the only biological structures that can be seen from space. And they support, it's a disproportionately important part of our ocean. So the coral reefs only take up less than 1% of the ocean because, like I said, they have to be near the surface and they have to be in the tropics. But a quarter of all marine life, something like 860,000 species depend on coral reefs. Wow. So it's really, they have an exceptional importance to our planet and to the health of our oceans and to the health of us. So 1 billion people depend on coral reefs for their primary source of protein. There is a healthy coral reef can diffuse 98% of wave energy coming towards shore that can be really destructive, especially during strong hurricanes. So coral reefs are incredibly important. And what bleaching is, to get back to that question, and this is part of the reason I hesitated to write a book about coral, was that because our planet has already warmed about 1.5 degrees, the symbiosis between the algae and the coral is really weirdly thermosensitive. And when the seawater warms by, say, 2 degrees for 4 weeks, the algae will leave the coral. And that's what bleaching is,
okay.
right? So when the algae leaves the coral's tissue is clear. It doesn't have any color. And what you're seeing is the calcium carbonate, the bones underneath the coral, the skeleton. And so that's why it's called bleaching, because the coral suddenly looks really white because you're seeing its skeleton. The tissue is clear on top of that skeleton.
So I've been fortunate enough to do some diving and snorkeling around corals, and it's not all green. So when I think of phytoplankton and photosynthesis, I think of green, but I've seen corals of all different colors. So does some corals just appear orange because of something else? It's still the phytoplankton.
It's still we can call it, people call them zooxanthellae, which is one word. It's kind of an answer, but it's not so easy. Phytoplankton's fine.
We'd have enough time in this conversation for me to expand my vocabulary.
Some people call them symbiodinium, which is the scientific name. Anyway.
But there's different colors.
There's different colors. They can have accessory pigments that change the color of the algae, can change its color.
So you can go from a coral reef with multicolors to white because
and to be fair, some corals do also have some pigments in them too. But when they're bleached, they're clear. And actually the coral, like you'll see, like if anyone's watched the movie Chasing Coral, the coral can become like kind of fluorescent highlighter colors. That is the coral creating its pigments. Those are sunscreens that they create right before they bleach. They'll create these sunscreens to try to keep their symbionts inside of them, but usually it doesn't work.
Yeah, okay.
So basically when the algae goes away, the coral is on starvation rations because it's not used to eating. It can eat, but it's not used to it. It's used to just living off of its solar panels. Mm-hmm. And so that's why half the coral in the world have already died. And so it's pretty glib.
So once it bleaches, once it gets to the point of, okay, this is a bleached reef, can it come back if the temperatures drop again? Okay.
Yes, it can. And that happens a lot. And I mean, to get like a little nerdy, there's actually been some evidence. So it turns out the coral can make associations with different kinds of phytoplankton, and some of them are more thermally tolerant. They'll keep the association longer, but they're a little more selfish, and they only give like 65% of the sugar they make to the coral. Okay. But a lot of corals around the world are making the trade. They're saying like, hey, we'd rather have a symbiont.
65% of something. Than 0% of, of nothing.
We recognize as landlords that the like air conditioner isn't working, so we can't charge as high a rent any longer. But like, at least we have a tenant, So like that's kind of one of the things we're seeing out in the oceans right now. Anyway, but it's bleak. I mean, the corals are definitely in a tough spot, and so when I was considering writing my second book about corals, I knew that, and I was really worried. I didn't want to write just like an obituary for the coral reefs. Like I just knew I couldn't sustain that given my sort of like low-lying optimism as like a person.
I get it. Yeah.
But it turned out I found there was this meeting in Florida that when I was like kind of thinking about writing this book where people were talking about what could we do to help coral reefs out. And the meeting was called Reef Futures. And I went down there and I found all these people around the world who were doing really exciting things to like support the health of coral reefs. And so the book turned into like, can we do? What are the possibilities? And I ended up traveling around the world to see some of those restoration sites and to interview those scientists. And I was able to sort of piece together a book. It's called, it's called Life on the Rocks, because coral are life, that make the rocks, building a future for coral reefs. And so it's really about like these things that people are doing that are trying to support the health of coral reefs. But what happened along the way was I was headed to Australia to go on this really exciting demonstration project where they're actually trying to make the clouds brighter over the Great Barrier Reef by shooting salt into the clouds, sea salt into the clouds. Like the simple way to think about it is adding glitter to the clouds.
Okay.
and it reflects the sun back. It will, if the sun's shining down on a cloud that's more glittery, it will reflect the sunlight back into outer space and cool underneath the cloud, and that can cool the coral reef. And so there was this really cool project I got invited on to go to a demonstration project that it's called cloud brightening, or marine cloud brightening, if you want to look into it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an idea that could be used on kind of a regional scale to cool something as big as the Great Barrier Reef.
Wow. Okay.
I was invited on the first demonstration project, and I was super excited, except for I was supposed to leave for Australia on March 23rd of 2020.
Yeah.
And so everything shut down. And at the same time, as I had been working on this coral book, my daughter had been going through a lot of struggles herself. And we realized she had severe OCD. We were trying to fight, and this wasn't part of the book at all. But basically, her world had been collapsing and collapsing and collapsing on her as I had been working on the coral reef. And I started to see these parallels between what was going on with my daughter and what was going on with the coral. And basically, what I saw was that our mental health is so foundational to who we are that everything rests on top of it, just like with the coral reefs and how many things in the ocean rest on top of their health. I also saw these parallels in that both things are so invisible. If you would have looked at my daughter as she was suffering from severe OCD, you wouldn't have known how sick she was. But she had lost her friends. She wasn't able to go to school. She wasn't able to wear very many kinds of clothes. She couldn't even, at the end, turn on the television. She looked fine, but she was so sick. And we, as terrestrial animals, as terrestrial beings, don't think about our oceans very much. They are so invisible to us. And at the same time as my trip to Australia to study the coral reefs fell apart, my daughter had to go to a residential facility for her mental health. And we had to drive her to Wisconsin because there wasn't a place in Texas or anywhere else that was able to treat how sick she had gotten. And so at the same time we were driving my daughter to get her the help she needed in Wisconsin, the guys who were doing this cloud brightening project in Australia had bubbled up against COVID, and they were driving 1,000 miles also to try to do this pilot project, which could maybe help the health of the coral reefs. And so the two stories, in time and space, became parallel. And I ended up, after we dropped my daughter off, which was one of the hardest things we'd ever done, I couldn't write without including what was happening in my own life as a mother.
I don't know how you could do anything. I don't know how you could do anything without including that.
Yeah.
Your story resonates. Right around the same time, I had similar issues with my child. I drove him 1,000 miles. I drove him 1,000 miles to a facility as well.
Wow.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So the book became Life on the Rocks for more than one reason.
Yeah, I get it.
But what happened was she did get really good care in Wisconsin. And they were able to teach her these tools that are not easy, that are dreadfully hard, that will require intention and funding for the rest of her life, but which allowed her to become functional again. And similarly, what I have saw going around the world for the coral was that we do have tools. We can solve these problems. They are not impossible problems to solve. They just require intentionality and funding and us caring and supporting these things that are not easy. There's no silver bullets in this game. And so the parallels got written into the book, and I sent it to my editor, and I was like, I don't know what to do because I can't seem to pull these things apart. And she was like, nope, let's just go with it.
Well, and at that particular period in time with COVID and things that were going on in the world, that was a common thread for a lot of people. That awareness of mental health and the oceans and our fragility as people for a variety of different things. I mean, it all tied together really well, probably.
Yes. Well, I mean, I thought it did. Yeah. So the book came out and it was, it got, yeah. I mean, it was an LA Times Book Award finalist. And it really, I think that because of these connections to us as humans, I mean, look, science is interesting, but like, unless I think you can connect it to the human experience, it doesn't resonate as strong. And it was impossible for me to pull it apart from this experience. So that's what happened. It's a tough book, though. I mean, it's not, and these aren't easy things, but ultimately, I think they're hopeful. Hopefully, they're hopeful. But finally, let me wrap it all up by coming back around and saying, first of all, my daughter is doing great, and she's in college now, and she's like, she's an advocate for OCD, for people to talk about OCD, to care about OCD, and to get the help they need. Luckily, with OCD, there's exposure response prevention therapy. It really can work, and so there are tools. That's the good news. It's not.
That's
easy.
beautiful, and I'm happy you mentioned that. And I wasn't really aware of your book, honestly, before we had this conversation.
Yeah.
Because I like the spontaneity of showing up and just having a conversation. So I appreciate you sharing all that. And it's a super important thing that I want people to hear because of my experience as well. My son's also doing well. And
great. I'm so happy because I wanted to ask. Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that.
He's doing better than I ever could have imagined. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I guess where I'm going with this is just, there are happy endings. There are, if we're purposeful and intentional about solving things, then, which sounds like what your book is about. So beautiful.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
So anyway, this guy in Honduras read the book and he emailed me and he was like, Julie, you have to come. And I want to say, I think some of the story about my daughters resonated with him as well. Mm-hmm. He, has some anxiety and he felt those connections. But also he happens to be the co-manager of this reef in this strange place where you wouldn't expect a coral reef to exist. And he's like, you have to come see my reef. It's really healthy. And I was like, impossible, because like I said, the Caribbean is probably had more disease and more bleaching than any other place on our planet. He's like, come see it, come see it, come see it. So my husband and I went down there and I went underwater, and just like when I had gone in the Red Sea, I was like, what is going on here? Like, this cannot be happening. Like, what is happening? Because it was a bustling, rich, colorful architectural reef, and that looked like it was from the 1970s. And so since then, I've gone back 5 times. I'm going back in March. 5 times. It'll be my 6th time in March. Started this nonprofit called Tela Coral in order to understand, like, what is going on? Why is this place so healthy? We are in the midst of, I know we're like, I've been talking so long, I'll kind of like go a little faster, but we are in the process of building the first marine biology lab on the mainland of Honduras. We bought some property with the guy who called me. His name's Antal Borksak. He's amazing. He's a visionary, recognized how important this reef was, made it a marine protected area, but also realized that's kind of a fragile protection. So he built the first free public aquarium in all of Central America to let people know what's out there. And it's 100% free. People line up all day long to go see the corals and all the fish and the whatever else, is in the tanks. And then he supports it by a coffee shop, a restaurant, an event space, and gift shop. But it's free to go in, and it's like the biggest tourist attraction in Honduras now. So working with Antal, we've bought a piece of property to build this marine lab on. We're going to get the corals into what's called a biobank, which is a safe place on land where they will be able to live forever in case who knows what happens out in the ocean. We also won a prize to make a documentary about Tela, which we're going to be filming in May. And we're just kind of taken off. And we've already discovered through a collaboration with the University of Miami that the corals in Tela, which are rare, and I mean, so rare, I can't even tell you, like the elkhorn corals there, which used to be the most abundant corals in the whole Florida. If you went snorkeling in Florida, you would see elkhorns everywhere. Now there are only 37 colonies left in the whole Florida reef tract. But in Tela, there's thousands. And all of those elkhorns have made that trade I told you about. They're all made the trade to the more thermotolerant algae. We just discovered it, unlike any other elkhorn in the Caribbean. So they're doing something different there. And we are really excited to keep trying to understand what's going on, trying to understand why, trying to tell people about this reef. And yeah, that's what Tela Coral is all about.
Do you feel like, is it a balancing act to tell people here? I guess let me back.
Yeah.
Because I've done enough scuba diving and snorkeling and been around long enough to know that sometimes the biggest threat to a reef, I don't know if it's the biggest threat. I probably shouldn't say the biggest threat. That's a big claim. A threat to the reef can be increased tourism and people, kicking the reef with their fins or standing on the reef or doing all these things. So I guess the question is that a challenge when you've got a place like this that you want to increase awareness, but at the same time, tell us more about that.
Yes, it's an interesting problem. I think we do need people to know about it or it's not going to be protected. And kind of case in point, soon after the Antal and, what he didn't do it alone and the other local people in Tela created the marine protected area, this Chinese mining operation came into Honduras and was going to set up a mine on a river that was about 20 kilometers away. And had that happened, the reef would have been killed. So in a way, tourism protects that kind of destruction, that more industrial scale destruction from happening. And I think that in Tela, it can be managed because you can't dive there all year round. The winter, they have a severe rainy season. And so diving is really limited to between March and August. And so there's a little bit of built-in protection just because of the visibility.
A resting period because
the visibility.
The visibility is low and
exactly
could dive there, but who would want to?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay.
So, and I've been there when the visibility is bad and it's really bad. You can't see it. You can't see anything. So I think that there's that. There's only one dive shop in town, which Antal owns. So there's a little bit, right now, there's a little bit of protection off on that as well. But the aquarium is really a place for education and teaching people and making coral reefs less invisible.
That's very, very cool.
So, yeah.
Well, we don't have the ability, since it's a podcast, we don't have the ability to show maps and, to figure this out. A lot of our listeners I want to put this into perspective and discuss a little bit about where it is, how to get there, if somebody wants to go there. So we've heard of, Roatan is quite kind of the well-known place, I guess, to go diving in Honduras.
Right.
So divers, snorkelers, people that are familiar with Honduras, how would you tell them, about how to get to Tela? What should they know?
So there is, I'm going to give a little boost to Adventures, who I've partnered with.
Which is how I connected with you, Julie.
Yes.
As you know, Lindsay was on the show, so yep.
Yeah, exactly. So Lindsay and I run a trip. Well, we've been running a trip once a year. Actually, if last minute anyone wants to get on the trip in March, we still have a couple slots. Adventures will, I think, continue to run a trip once a year. And it's really fun because we'll do a little bit of science, look for some coral babies. We've discovered that there's babies growing in the bay, which a lot of coral reefs in the Caribbean aren't producing babies anymore. And we found baby corals. So we'll look for them again and we will do some diving. And it's a really great trip. And then I think Lindsay is planning to make some guides for if you wanted to go to Tela. You could fly into San Pedro Sula, which is easy. All the big carriers fly there. And then it's an hour and a half drive. And you can get a taxi, you can a car. If you're in Roatan, there's a ferry that goes from Roatan to La Ceiba, and then you can take a taxi to Tela from there. So it's right on it's not hard to get around in this part of Honduras, the Caribbean side. And if you want to go, you can contact me through telacoral.org and I can hook you up with some taxi drivers and stuff like that who are great. Cool. And then there's a really, really wonderful hotel tourism board in Tela. The tourism board, you can contact them too, and they can give you all kinds of information. They're very delightful people. So It's not like it's not already a tourist place. It has a lot of tourist pressure on it already, but it's all Honduran.
Okay. Very cool. Well, I wanted to just share that because anybody that's listening to this that's interested in, should be everybody interested in the reef, right? As we've kind of touched on. Julie, we've discussed a bunch of things. I think we've covered quite a few things, and absolutely fascinating conversation. I'm sure that people are still listening to this. They find it just as fascinating as I did. Thank you so much. I'm curious, what did I forget to ask you? What should I ask you? Or is there anything else that you want to share kind of with the audience right now before we wrap it up?
I mean, I guess if you have an interest in Tela, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are trying to build this biobank to protect these really special corals. So if you want to check out our website, we keep a pretty good blog of our activities. It's telacoral.org. If you want to make a donation, hope it's okay, I can ask, but it would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So,
and also just like, I hope to people, I would ask people to just pay attention to our oceans. They're really critical to all of the weather patterns on our planet. They're really critical to our health up here on land. I think that, we spend 250 times more on space than we do on our oceans, and our oceans are right here on our planet. And I worry as we move into a time when climate change is going to become even more critical that we are paying less and less attention to our oceans. So just remember we're on a blue planet.
Important message that also parallels, we touched on mental health as well. That's a good thing
That's
to
right.
pay attention to as well. There's a lot of parallels there. Julie, I look forward to reading both of your books. And
thank you.
Fascinating. I love it. I'm so happy that conversation came up, and look forward to collaborating with you on projects in the future. We will have the website. You mentioned the website address a couple of times. It's going to be right at the top of the show notes. So I would encourage anybody listen to this, go into the show notes, go take a look at Julie's website and do whatever you can to support what she's doing. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Jason. This was so much fun. I really appreciate everyone who listened to this too. Thank you to all your listeners.
All right. Thank you, Julie.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.